All right, y'all. We have to start by addressing the pronounced contrast between the QueenzFlip era of the JBP and the Mona Love era of the JBP. And listen, this difference is loud. Flip has clearly absorbed a lot of the criticism coming from the audience, the comments, the community, and even his own co-hosts. You can tell he took it personally and adjusted how he shows up on the pod. Now here's where it gets tricky for Flip. When he first joined, his energy was exactly why people stopped calling the JBP stagnant. But hold up, too much of a good thing can turn messy real quick. That energy started spilling over into chaos, to the point where it wasn't controllable anymore. And instead of helping the team, it started working against the flow of the show. So naturally, Joe, Ian, and the rest of the crew began moving differently with him. So differently that Flip genuinely feels like his job might be on the line. And honestly, there is some weight to that feeling because his days on the pod were reduced. He says it's not a demotion since the pay stayed the same, but let's be real, his schedule got cut. Because of that, Flip clearly switched up his approach, and you can see it plain as day. On the days Flip is present now, the pod runs smoothly, like seamless smooth. And it's seamless on the episodes Mona appears on too. Now you already know what usually comes with that, but since she's not here, I'm not even going there. I just want to point out the contrast. What really caught my attention though is the tension brewing between Ice and Flip. Not explosive tension, but that low simmer kind. Ice constantly pokes and prods at Flip whenever Flip speaks on Freeze, his family, or those dynamics, and Freeze stays on Flip's neck. Even though, let's be honest, Joe is usually the one lighting the match. Joe cracks the joke first every time, so it really comes down to two possibilities. Either Ice is redirecting his frustration at Flip because Flip doesn't like people discussing his family, and I'll give Ice grace on that. Or Ice simply doesn't respect Flip the same way he respects Joe, and when Joe signs the checks, well, you can connect the dots. I'm honestly torn on this one, because I agree with Ice on one thing. No, you don't get to joke about my family, my relationship, or how I treat my woman. You don't get to fire shots just because Joe did, especially when nobody's allowed to speak on your family. On that point, I'm with Ice. But at the same time, I'm also with Flip. Freeze, you chime in on everybody else's jokes. When they were calling me Chicky Nuggy, you laughed along. Every time they dogpile someone, you jump right in. But the second the joke swings your way, suddenly it's a problem. Now you've got chest out, bravado activated, shutting everything down. And it makes you look overly sensitive. I know Ice doesn't care what the community says, but the optics? Yeah, you're coming off sensitive. Now I will say this, Joe has definitely had you in his sights lately. He's been shooting non-stop, so I'll give you that much. But at the same time, you can't dish it out and then fold when it's returned. You don't take jokes well, yet you're always in on everyone else's. So I'm at a crossroads with it. But one thing I've definitely noticed, this isn't the first time Ice has come at Flip sideways the moment Flip brings up Freeze, and that's something worth clocking moving forward. Alright, so on this specific episode, I had just started tapping into Wayano on YouTube. Shout out to Wayano, because he's been catching my attention heavily lately, and it just so happened that he brought up academics. Now, I had already seen that academic stream where he was asking why nobody wants to speak on Jay-Z, Aaliyah, and those old photos. He was basically like, how come your friends' names are floating around in these files and clips, but suddenly everyone's silent? And his point was clear. People give grace to the ones they're connected to. Listening to that made something click for me. Because didn't Joe just recently come out calling out rappers for staying quiet on issues? That irony didn't sit right with me. Joe is extremely skilled at redirecting attention away from himself. Whenever the spotlight starts creeping his way, he pivots and hands it to somebody else. I'm actually breaking this down later on Patreon when I talk about the Shannon Sharp interview. Joe has mastered that move, but at the same time, academics wasn't wrong. And Wayano wasn't wrong either, because he addressed it directly on his platform. Now, both of us are curious. Are other people going to speak on their own platforms too? Because there's a growing list of things people want Joe to address. They want him to talk about Nicki Minaj. They want him to talk about the Epstein files. They also want him to stop leaning so hard into the political talk, the F Trump this, F Trump that energy. And listen, I agree with him in certain areas, especially where Ice stands, but I'm not about to go all the way down that road today. The real issue is this. People want Joe to keep the same energy for those he's cool with, because Joe is the loudest one asking, where are the rappers speaking up? But Joe, you can't play both sides of that fence. You're the one with the platform. You're the one with the mic. You're the one reaching millions of people multiple times a week. So when I tuned in to the latest episode and didn't hear a single word about it, I noticed. Instead, y'all were deep diving the Grammys. Who looked good, who didn't, and all that surface level stuff. But when real, heavy topics are sitting right there on the table, suddenly nobody's hungry. That stood out to me. And it's something I'm paying closer attention to going forward. I don't think Joe is bought. I don't think people are literally in its pockets. It feels more like preventative behavior, like, let me not upset anyone I might do business with later. And to be fair, he's been addressing that criticism more lately, so I know he sees it. But the higher he climbs, the quieter his voice seems to get. Every interview I watch Joe do, I expect him to speak on his own life and experiences, not the business side, because he already does that everywhere else. But once he pivots to current events, he never really lands the plane. So in my head, I'm like, oh, this is future protection, not even about right now. And that's telling. I can't even pretend this criticism is new. People have been saying it. I just never paid it much attention before. Because I didn't come to the Joe Budden podcast for political breakdowns. But since Mark Lamont Hill joined the pod, and shout out to him, by the way, things shifted. I saw comments saying the pod was better without him, and I don't agree with that at all. Since he's been there, the conversations have gotten heavier and more serious. So now I'm watching to see if they're actually going to go deeper, or if they're just going to mention topics so they can say they mentioned them. Because toward the end of the pod, Joe leaned into a patriarchal angle. I know he didn't fully agree with Mark on it, but I appreciated the exchange. And if Joe is willing to go there, I want to see where that leads. Is he going to start speaking freely again, or is he going to stay quiet and keep pointing elsewhere? That's what I'm watching for. Y'all let me know what you think in the comments. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and if you have, you already know how we're rocking. As I said earlier, I'll be on Patreon breaking down the Joe Budden and Shannon Sharpe Club Shay Shay interview. There were things in there I didn't expect at all. I'll catch y'all over there. Peace.